All right, our next presentation is going to be a tag team by Rachel Johnson and Dr. Derald Holtkamp. Rachel has been with MetaFarms since April 2025, serving as the technical account and product support lead. She brings 20 years of experience to that team. Prior to joining MetaFarms, she has worked in varying capacities within the swine nutrition industry. Rachel's passion as a nutritionist was to help producers reach production goals that drive, and that drive has translated nicely to MetaFarms, where she can help producers use their own data to make decisions. Dr. Holtkamp is a professor in the Department of Veterinary Diagnostic and Production Animal Medicine in the College of Veterinary Medicine at Iowa State University. Dr. Holtkamp's research focuses on managing infectious swine diseases, biosecurity, disease risk assessment, and the economics of animal health and disease. Let's welcome Rachel Johnson and Dr. Holtkamp.
All right, I'm leading with my slides. All right, so today I'm going to say that if you're here, you already believe that pig livability is an issue in the U.S. And so what Rachel and I are going to try to do is put some numbers to that to look at maybe what the magnitude of that is. Okay, and I'm going to do that from an international perspective first, and then Rachel will do that from a U.S. perspective. And so this is the central theme of my presentation, and that is that the U.S. producers have been low-cost producers for a long time and remain so. But the U.S. has a productivity problem, okay? And relatively high mortality is a big contributor to that, and it's putting producers in the U.S. at an economic disadvantage to producers in other countries, especially Brazil, okay? And I'll talk about why that matters in a little bit here. And so most of the numbers I'm going to present, or all the numbers really, well, with one exception, are from this global swine benchmarking project that I've been working on now for several years. And so we'll talk about that project and some of the sources of the data, show you some of the reports we produce annually for that, and then the bulk of this is really on that last bullet there, and looking at how much, okay, we're going to accept that we have a productivity gap. So what? How big is that? What is it? How much does it matter from an economic standpoint? So that'll be the last piece there. So the Global Swine Benchmarking Project is a project that you can scan that QR code there if you want to see the past reports on that. It's a project that's funded by MSD Animal Health, or Merck Animal Health here in the U.S., and do this in collaboration with Lee Schultz, Drs. Lee Schultz and Dermot Hayes at Iowa State University. They were both agricultural economists at Iowa State until recently here. Dermot has retired, and Lee has taken a new position at Everag, but both are still involved in this project. We do this annually. We typically there's a little bit of delay. We get the data. For example, right now we're working on 2024 data, still trying to round up the last bit of that. We have most of it, but we still haven't got all of it. And then we do the analysis, and so there's usually about a 1-year lag after the end of the year we're working on. We are working on a project now just recently here where we're going to try to get some of the market-sensitive prices, like market pig prices and then diet ingredient prices, and then update on a quarterly basis the results. And so that would be 4 to 6 weeks after the end of the quarter, we would be able to publish some more current results there. And we're working on that with Everag too to get those prices. So the sources of the data, there's a group called Interpig. I wasn't even aware of this group until 6 or 7 years ago, but they're kind of a loose-knit collaboration of mostly ag economists, but there's some others in that group as well, and then primarily from the Americas and Europe. And so at the time I became aware of them and started working with their data, they did not have any data and still don't have any data for Asia. Lee Schultz is the main representative, Dermot too, our main representative from the U.S. in that group. Lee provides most of the data. And I've started attending a few of their meetings, but it's primarily Lee and Dermot there. And then we work with MSD Animal Health and some of their industry contacts then to get data for those 4 countries there in Asia as well. And then we developed a model, same model we used every year now, production economic model. It's by country, so we have 1 column for each country, and then by phase of production. So we have a separate phase for breed to wean, wean to feeder or the nursery, and then feeder to market the finishing. And then the results we typically publish just for on a breed to market basis. All right, so let's look at some of the things we produce there. This is kind of the headline chart we produce every year. The yellow bars there represent the total cost of production in US dollars per pound on a carcass weight basis. And then the gray line is market pig prices, or revenue per pound of carcass. And then the blue shaded area at the bottom there represents the profit that year, and you can see that red line is the average profit. So in 2023, simple average profitability was about break even there of all the countries in our database. And so you can see on the left there, countries in Asia, Japan, South Korea, China, Vietnam, tend to be the higher cost producers. You got the Americas on the right, US, Canada, Brazil, and then Europe in between. Brazil, the representatives of Interpig, think it's important to represent Santa Catarina and Mato Grosso separately, so they provide 2 data points there. That's the SC and the MT there. And then the other thing I'd just note on this is, it already strikes me how strongly associated those market pig prices are with the cost of production. So some of that's some barriers to trade there. But all right, and then I'll just show this because that's probably the most relevant for this conference. We do benchmark pig mortality and sow mortality, and so the red lines there represent, or red bars represent birth to market mortality. So I just combine pre-wean mortality, nursery, and finisher together. And then the blue represents sow mortality, and the lines are the simple average there. Okay, so you can see countries on the left there. Last year, U.S. was in the lead, so to speak here, but Spain has taken us over, and even Canada's mortality has come up. So all 3 of those countries are dealing with, these. In 2023, we're dealing with relatively nasty isolates of PRRS virus, the lineage 1C.5 and others now. In Spain, what they call labeled the Rosalia virus there, right? So countries on the left, all dealing with some pretty nasty PRRS. On the other hand, countries on the right there, Brazil and Hungary. Brazil has never had PRRS virus or PED virus, as far as I know. And then Hungary has recently eradicated PRRS virus from the country, and I think they're still maintaining that, but certainly was the case in 2023. And so I'm not saying PRRS is the only reason this looks like it does, but it's probably a pretty significant contributor to it. All right, and so this is the most important piece of what I have to say, and this is how much difference then if we say yes, we have a mortality and a productivity gap, especially with Brazil. What is the economic magnitude of that? That's what we'll look at here. And so we do this analysis every year too. It's basically what we describe as a factor analysis. We try to see what factors contribute to the relative profitability of producers in each country every year, okay? And so we look at all those factors you see at the top there, the market pig prices, feed prices, productivity, and so forth. But we start by just looking at the relative profitability overall, right? That's the first column on the left there, and that's not absolute profitability, that's just relative to a hypothetical average. Now in 2023, the hypothetical average was about 0, so is roughly, but that just, for 2023, kind of shows you where, due to all the factors, where countries land, or producers in each country landed. And then to look at each of these factors individually, we start by calculating a simple average for all the values across all the countries. And then everybody gets the same values, okay? So everybody's starting at the same start line. And then for each factor, one at a time, we give the country each country its own values, okay? And so that's then yields. We just look at how much difference that makes for profitability, and that's what you see reported here in this table. And so the positive numbers mean that country has a competitive advantage because of that factor. The The negative numbers mean they had a relative disadvantage because of that factor, okay? And so the shades of green and red then are associated with the magnitude of that positive or negative number as well then, okay? And so hopefully you can see just by looking at that market pig prices and feed prices and productivity contribute the most, are the most important factors for the relative advantage or disadvantage, a competitive advantage or disadvantage countries have in 2023, okay? And that's pretty consistent from year to year. Now, no surprise there, market pig prices and feed prices. We all know that's a big factor, right? But I think the take home here is that productivity is right up there, right? It really, there's a lot of variation country to country, and it really matters. Isolate the US there. In 2023, if you remember back that far, relatively low market pig prices here, and so that was a big contributor in 2023 to the relative competitive disadvantage we had in the US. That fluctuates a lot from year to year, of course. Look a lot better this year. But the other one that contributed to a significant economic disadvantage is the productivity. So in 2023, it was $18.69 per pig marketed, okay? And so that's a pretty big number. All the other things are either break even or advantages. So let's isolate now that productivity column here on the next slide and just look at the US compared to Brazil. So we have our 1869 disadvantage due to the relatively lower productivity in the US. Compared to that to Brazil, that has relatively higher productivity, especially much lower mortality. That gives them, as you can see there, an economic advantage of $13.21 in Santa Catarina and 11.88 in Mato Grosso, okay? So if you look at that difference between the negative number for the US and the positive number for Brazil, that's where you get this $30.57 to $31.90 per pig marketed gap between US and Brazil due to the relative differences in their productivity. And if you extrapolate that to the US, and this is crude, I'm not going to publish this in a peer-reviewed journal, but it gives you an idea of the magnitude of the problem here. Extrapolate that, I just took a rough average of that 30.57 and 31.90 and rounded down to $31 per pig marketed and said, okay, if you take that and multiply it by the 128 million pigs we marketed in the US in 2023, that's about $4 billion. Okay, that's basically what we're spotting Brazil as an advantage due to their better productivity there. Why does that matter? Well, if you pay attention to this kind of thing, you have become accustomed to seeing these types of headlines where the Brazil breaks another pork export record year after year. And that article on the right there is the most recent one I could find. That's for September of this year. And I know you can't read those bullets there, but I'll just highlight a couple of points there. Both volume and value set new records in September. Year over year, the value increased by 30%. Value of exports from Brazil increased by about 30%. Okay? And then it cites their main export markets as being China, Vietnam, Mexico, and a few others there. And again, if you're paying attention to that kind of thing, you recognize those are also markets that we depend on heavily, right? And so this really matters, right, for global competitiveness and going forward. Who's going to I'll say be a competitive player in the export markets. And I mentioned earlier that PRRS virus, right, is probably a major contributor to that, but I thought it'd be good to try to put some numbers to just how much of that productivity gap is due to PRRS virus. And so I took the update we did here recently. Henry Ozemeki and I and others worked on this and updated the cost of PRRS, the economic impact of it, and published that recently here. And it was $1.2 billion. And then if you adjust that for inflation and for the size of the U.S. herd, it's still a little over $1 billion. But that's a pretty good number. And so then if you take that $1.2 billion and compare that to the $4 billion that we had from a couple of slides ago, the total value of that productivity gap, that's roughly about a third of that productivity gap we have with Brazil. You'd say that's probably due to PRRS. Now, the caution here is that when we did that recent update, that was for 2016 to 2020 data. All right, since 2020, we've had some more virulent isolates of the PRRS virus, lineage 1C.5 and others, that have probably made that economic impact of PRRS go up considerably again, right? And so let's just say roughly, probably a third to maybe 40, maybe 45% of that productivity gap we have with Brazil is due to PRRS virus. I'm, again, not going to publish those numbers, but roughly gives you an idea of the magnitude there. So in conclusion, the U.S. Still is a relatively low-cost producer, but it does have a productivity gap, especially with Brazil. PRRS virus and mortality, pig mortality especially, is a major contributor to that gap, and it's putting producers in the U.S. at an economic disadvantage. And so the question I'll leave you with is, can we reverse that? That's the topic of this conference. If you know my bias, you know it. I think we got to get more serious about biosecurity. We got to do that better, identify where the gaps are, and commit more resources to those. I think continuing to spend time on trying to keep pigs alive after they're infected with PRRS virus is a fool's game, but that's my bias. So. You're up, Rachel.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Holtkamp. I didn't get instructions on this, so we'll see how it goes. So I'm not going to get into a lot of the economics and such that Dr. Holtkamp presented, but I'm going to try to explain some trends that we've seen over the last 10 years in terms of herd mortality to kind of cover where this data is coming from. Within the MetaFarms database, we've got roughly 21 million active sows historically, with about 1.3 annual production numbers. On the finishing side, we have over 1 billion pigs started, with about 50 million added annually. For the sake of this presentation, I think it's important to note these are US customers only. The nursery finish and wean to finish data are pulled by closed group date. The sow data is pulled by calendar month. And most importantly, data integrity rules have been applied to maintain some integrity. So we'll start with the sow. And I apologize, these charts are going to be much uglier than what Dr. Holtkamp had, but I thought it was important to kind of take that 10-year look back. So most of them will be presented this way. We've got month along the x-axis, percent mortality will be along the y, and then the legend is there on the right. Hopefully we can see the colors okay, but just to kind of set the standard, the dark blue is going to be 2015, orange is 2016, lavender is 17, the green is 18, the red is 19, light blue is 20, gold is 21, purple 22, light green 23, and then 24 is pink. I don't know how to work around that for colorblind people, so hopefully we got it good enough. So I think it's important when we look at these charts is we're going to see those seasonality trends, and then the average for this 10-year period was 12.81%. The top 10% of our producers had a sow mortality of 6.28%, and the bottom 10% were just under 20 at 19.68%. I realize those charts are busy, so I'm going to try to break it out a little bit where I found things interesting. So I thought within the sow mortality, it kind of broke into 2 3-year periods. So we've got 15, 16, and 17 on the bottom there, where the sow mortality averaged 9.87%. And I'm comparing that to the most recent 3-year period of 22, 23, and 24, where sow mortality was 15.7%. So that's a 59% increase of sow mortality in just that short period of time. We'll look at some litter performance. So this chart's going to be a little bit different. Litter size is going to be on the far left, percent loss on the right, year on the bottom. So the green bar is total born. So as you can see, we have had a steady increase of total born throughout the years, coming in about just 2.3 pigs over where we were in 15. Live born has also increased, and it's just under 2 pigs added. But stillborns and mummies have remained pretty steady, which I think is a testament to our industry. When we look at pre-wean mortality, we see it kind of spike there in 22, and I think it is important to notice, like, we have seen improvement in that. It's not all just bad news. I thought this chart did a good job of kind of showing that spread more clearly. So the darker line is percent mortality, the orange bar is born alive numbers. And so I think what this says is that gap that we've seen is improvement. So while we are having more pigs born, we're keeping more of them alive and getting them into the system. Again, another one of those busy charts. When we look at the 10-year, the average pre-wean mortality is 14%. Our top 10% of producers are just over 8%, and that bottom 10% are at 19.6. For this one, I broke it out into the 2 5-year periods. So we've got 15 through 19 on the left, 20 through 24 on the right. I gave you guys the individual numbers because I thought that would be of interest. And that's a pretty substantial increase, I think, over those 2 5-year periods. We can all look back to 2020, and I think this is a testament to how our world changed at that point in time. But I do think it is good to see that that number in 23 and 24 is improving. Next, we'll look at the nursery. Again, I know these charts are busy, but I think it is good to kind of view that seasonality year over year. But the unfortunate thing is those lines continue to move upward. The average for nursery mortality is just under 3.5%. Our top 10 producers are doing an outstanding job. They're under 1% nursery mortality, and that bottom 10% is just over 7%. For this one, I thought 3 years were kind of note. So 2015 was our lowest in this look, so just under 3%. Then compared to 2022, which was the highest, and then 2024, since that is the most recent data. When we look at that jump from 15 to 22, it's over 44% higher nursery mortality. So evidence that we have had a problem. That's why we have this conference. But the good news is that is coming down. We're down 14% from 2022. We're still high, but we're making progress. So just under 24% higher than we were from that low point in 2015. Next, we'll take a look at the girl finish data. Again, we see that seasonality. We see kind of how it just increases year over year. Average here is 4.5%. Our top 10% of producers are just under 2%. That bottom 10% are at 8.7%. I thought the data pretty clearly separated itself out into those 2 3-year periods again. So 15, 16, and 17 are there on the bottom. Average mortality during that period was 3.9%. The most recent 3 years, 22, 23, 24, over 5%. So 36% higher finishing mortality. Wean to finish gets a little more hairy, as you would expect. So a lot messier lines on this graph. Average wean to finish mortality within the data set was 6.3%. Our top 10% of producers are at 2.8%, which is pretty good. And then the bottom 10% was at 10.8%. Again, kind of hard to break that out. So 15 was our low point, so just 5.5% wean to finish mortality, which is 30% higher from where we've been these last 3 years. So as we know, mortality is still quite high. I thought the good point of this is that we've seen improvements across every facet of production in these last few years. 24 was down in almost every category. So that mortality that peaked, and pre-wean mortality is going down despite liveborn. So that's huge. We're making progress. Nursery mortality is well off its high of 2022. I would say that the opportunity areas, from my opinion, would be finishing and wean to finishing. So despite the fact that we have seen improvements, not as significant as we have in those other metrics. So that would be my challenge to the group, is how do we improve those efforts there. So I think I was pretty fast, sorry for that, but